Hello everyone. Today we're going to dive deep into an important foundation of biology, classification and characteristics of living organisms. So we're going to truly understand at the end of this, what does it mean to be alive, how scientists organize living things, and why is life so diverse and yet so connected? So let's begin with characteristics of living organisms. So first, how do we know if something is alive? Well, living organisms share certain essential characteristics that distinguish them from non-living things. There are 7 characteristics, and in order to be classified as a living thing, an organism must have all these features, even if some are limited. And an easy way to remember these 7 characteristics is with the acronym Mrs. GREN, where each letter stands for one of the characteristics. So M is movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, and nutrition. So let's break down each of these characteristics with some examples. So first is movement. Well, movement is defined as the ability to move parts of the body or the entire organism. Being able to move allows organisms to find food, escape predators, and adapt to their environment. Animals move, right? Obviously. Birds fly, cats run. But plants can also move, even if the movement is slower. This is called phototropism, and this is where plants grow towards the light source. See? So this movement helps them to make food through photosynthesis. Next is respiration. So respiration is defined as the chemical process of breaking down food, glucose, to release energy. And this energy is necessary for survival. It is important to note that respiration is not the same as breathing. Breathing is taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. It is the physical movement of air. Respiration, however, is the broader total process of gas exchange and energy production at the cellular level. Simply, respiration is using glucose and oxygen in the cell to release energy. So there are 2 types of respiration. One is aerobic respiration, which uses oxygen. Most animals and plants do aerobic respiration. The other type is anaerobic respiration, which uses no oxygen. So some bacteria and our muscle cells, especially during very intense exercise, do anaerobic respiration. Without respiration, our cells wouldn't have energy to do anything. They wouldn't even be able to divide. Next is sensitivity. So sensitivity is the ability to detect and respond to external or internal stimuli. So let's unpack this one really carefully. A stimulus is a change in the environment. This could be a light, a sound, a temperature, or a touch, which could be like a pressure difference. Receptors are part of the organism that detect the stimulus. The response is the reaction made after detecting the stimulus. So for example here, we have a Venus flytrap. The stimulus is the insect, the fly, which touches little tiny trigger hairs. The receptor is the tiny hairs which are specialized to detect the touch. The response is the plant snapping shut to trap the prey. So sensitivity is important because without sensitivity, organisms wouldn't know if something is good, like food, or if something is dangerous, like a predator, or even putting your hand on a hot stove. Next is growth. So growth is a permanent increase in size and dry cell mass due to cell division. It's important to note that it is permanent. And growth isn't just about size, it's also about the tissues and organs that are developing so that the organism can survive and later on reproduce. So some examples are a baby becoming an adult, or a seed becoming a sapling, becoming a tree. Reproduction. Reproduction is the process of producing a new individual, an offspring, from an already existing individual, which are parents. This is very important to continue their species line. And there are two types of reproduction. There is sexual reproduction, which two parents, so here there's a sperm and the egg, will contribute genetic material to create a new individual. Asexual reproduction happens when one organism clones itself. And it's important to note that in sexual reproduction, there is variety, and in asexual reproduction, there is no variety. Because, look here, this is the parent, and it's going to clone itself into two daughter cells, which are identical to each other and also to the parent. But here, the sperm cells come from a different individual, the egg comes from a different individual, and together they're going to create a new, different individual. So this is also important. If organisms can't reproduce, their species will disappear. Next is excretion. Excretion is the removal of waste products that have been produced inside the body from metabolic processes. This could be respiration or digestion. Without excretion, toxic substances would build up and harm the organism. So, for example, humans excrete urea. Excretion is removing waste products that are produced inside the body from metabolic processes like respiration. Without excretion, toxic substances would build up and harm the organism. So, for example, humans excrete urea in urine, and plants release oxygen as a waste product during photosynthesis. Now, it's important to remember that excretion is different from simply getting rid of undigested food. That is called egestion with an E. Next is nutrition. Nutrition is the intake of materials that are needed for energy, growth, and repair. So there's two main strategies. There's autotrophs, like plants. They make their own food by photosynthesis. So autotrophs are organisms that make their own food. Then there are heterotrophs, which are organisms that consume other organisms, like animals. So without nutrition, no organism would be able to get the raw materials or the energy that it needs to survive. So now that we know what life is, let's look at the concept and uses of classification systems. So why do we need to classify organisms? Well, classification helps scientists organize living things into groups based on their shared characteristics. It makes it easier to study relationships, identify species, and even to understand how species have evolved over time. So what is a species? Well, a species is a group of organisms that can reproduce together and produce fertile offspring. Now, the important word here is fertile. What does fertile mean? Well, fertile means that the offspring can grow up and have babies of their own. If the offspring cannot reproduce, it's called sterile. So for example here, a horse and a donkey can mate, but their offspring, a mule, is sterile. So that means that they are different species. So when we check if two organisms are the same species, we can ask, can they reproduce and make an organism that can also reproduce? So the binomial system. So Scientists use a binomial naming system, which was invented by Carl Linnaeus in the 18th century, this guy, and he created it so that we can name organisms. Each organism will get a two-part Latin name. The first word is the genus, which is capitalized. The second word is the species, which is in lowercase. So for example, Homo sapiens, humans. Homo is the genus, sapiens is the species. So this system helps to avoid confusion because local names can change from place to place, but the Latin names are the same everywhere. In the past, scientists mainly relied on physical features to classify organisms, like their shape, the number of legs they have, or their color. But today, with advancements in biology, modern classification now uses DNA sequencing to determine the evolutionary relationships. So what is DNA? Well, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the instruction manual that's found inside of our cells. And it's written in a special chemical code that only uses 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. This code decides everything about the organism, from eye color to even body structure. So now, scientists can form DNA sequencing, which means they read the exact order of the A, T, C, and G letters in the DNA. By comparing the DNA sequences of 2 organisms, they can see how similar their instructions are. So for example, if you sequence the DNA of a human and a chimpanzee, you'll find that they're 98% identical. That is because humans and chimpanzees share a recent common ancestor. If 2 organisms have very similar DNA sequences, it means they are closely related and that they evolved apart only recently. If their DNA is very different, it means that they're less closely related and they split from a common ancestor a long time ago. You can sort of think of it like a family recipe. 2 cousins might make slightly different cakes, but most ingredients and steps are the same. But a complete stranger might make a totally different recipe. So next, let's look at the features of organisms. So, species, genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain. These are all the groupings that living organisms can fall under. Let's look at the kingdoms of life. Well, living organisms are grouped into 5 big kingdoms based on some of their basic features. So animals, plants, fungi, prokaryotes, and protoctista. Let's look at each one. Animals. So animals are multicellular, they have no cell walls, they eat other organisms, so they're heterotrophic, and some examples are humans, dogs. Plants are multicellular, they have cell walls made of cellulose, they're autotrophic, so they make their own food. Some examples, trees and flowers. Next are fungi. Fungi have cell walls made of chitin, not cellulose. Chitin. They can be unicellular, like yeast, or they can be multicellular, like hyphae. They absorb nutrients. They don't photosynthesize. So some examples, mushrooms and yeast. Next, we look at prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are tiny, unicellular, and they have no nucleuses. For example, bacteria are prokaryotes. Next is protoctista. Protoctista are mostly unicellular. Some have chloroplasts, and examples of these are amoeba and algae. So let's look at the animal kingdom in detail. The animal kingdom is further divided into vertebrates, animals with a backbone, and invertebrates, animals without a backbone. Invertebrates are then further divided into many phyla. And we'll look at arthropods, animals with jointed legs and exoskeletons. So let's look at the vertebrates. These are animals with a backbone. So fish are cold-blooded. They have gills, scales and fins, and they lay eggs or give birth to live ones in water. Amphibians are cold-blooded. They have gills and lungs. They have thin, moist skin. They lay jelly-like eggs in water. Reptiles are cold-blooded. They have lungs. They have scales. And they lay leathery eggs on land, or they give birth to live ones. Birds are warm-blooded. They have lungs. They have feathers and wings, and they lay hard eggs on land. Mammals are warm-blooded. They have lungs, they have hair, and they give birth to live ones, and they feed their young ones on milk. So for example, a bat is a mammal, not a bird, because it has fur and it feeds milk to its babies. So next, let's look at arthropods, which are a class of invertebrates, and it is the largest group of invertebrates. So these are animals with jointed legs and a hard outer shell, and we call this hard outer shell an exoskeleton. So arthropods can be divided into more smaller groups, and one is Diplopoda, which are millipedes. They have a round body, they have a segmented body, and they have 2 pairs of legs per segment. Trylopoda are centipedes. They have a flattened body, they're segmented, but they have 1 pair of legs per segment. Next are crustaceans, like crabs, lobsters, crayfish. They are hard, they have a flexible exoskeleton, they have gills, they have 2 pairs of antennae, they have 2 body sections, an abdomen and a cephalothorax. So cephalothorax is just a conjoined head and thoracic cavity. And they're mostly aquatic. Arachnids have 2 body sections, an abdomen and a cephalothorax. They have no antennae. They have 4 pairs of legs. Examples are spiders and scorpions. Next is insects. They have 3 body parts, 1 pair of antennae, 3 pairs of legs, and sometimes they can have wings. They also have a mandible. Examples are wasps, ladybugs, grasshoppers, cockroaches, and ants. So a bat is a mammal, not a bird, because it has fur and gives birth. A butterfly is an insect because it has 6 legs and 3 body parts. Classifying plants. Well, plants can be divided into 2 types. Flowering, which are monocotyledons and dicotyledons, and non-flowering plants, ferns. Let's look at the non-flowering plants first. So ferns don't produce flowers or seeds. Instead, they reproduce by spraying spores, which are found under their fronds, which is what we call their leaves. Now let's look at flowering plants. Flowering plants are plants that produce seeds inside a flower, and these are further divided into two, monocots and dicots. So the full name is monocotyledon and dicotyledon. So the seeds, a monocot is a single cotyledon. A dicot has two cotyledons. The leaves are also different. The monocots have parallel veins, while the dicots have branched veins. The flowers are different. Monocots usually have petals that come in multiples of 3, but dicots have petals that come in multiples of 4 or 5. Stems, the monocots have a scattered vascular bundle, and in dicots, the vascular bundle is in rings. The roots are also different. Monocots have fibrous roots, and dicots have a tap root. So now let's talk about viruses. Well, viruses are the rebels in biology. They're not considered living organisms because they do not carry out the 7 life processes. Remember Mrs. GREN. They do not respire, they do not move, grow, or excrete independently. Instead, they invade a host cell and take over the cell's machinery and force it to make more copies of the virus. The entire purpose of a virus, its life goal, is to make more of itself. So the structure of a virus is very simple. It is merely a genetic material, which can be RNA or DNA. And this is also why we say viruses are rebels, because they're going against the central dogma of life. They have a protein coat that covers the genetic material to protect it. And some viruses can have an envelope, or it won't have an envelope. And this envelope is made from the host's membrane. Depending on where the virus is, the membrane is going to be from there. So it could be a nuclear membrane if it is being released from the nucleus, or it can be a cellular membrane envelope if it's being released from the cytoplasm. So some examples of viruses are influenza, HIV, rabies, coronavirus, smallpox. It's important here to note that a virus behaves like a life form only when it is inside a living cell. Outside of a host cell, outside of another living organism cells, they are just inert particles. We actually call them virions when it is outside. It is inert. And that brings us to the end of today's exploration of classification and the characteristics of living organisms. Remember, life is organized, structured, and deeply connected, from DNA to entire kingdoms. Understanding this system helps you see the hidden order behind the diversity of life. And that is the end. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and always dig deeper. Biology is the story of life itself. See you next time.